think there are really two main factors that make experimentation and optimization work. One is a willingness to tolerate managed risk. You're running experiments and you want to be able to take some swings and see what works and see what doesn't. And the second one is velocity and speed, and how quickly you can go through your ideas and find the needle in the haystack that is going to work. And tolerance for risk and velocity are two things that are often not present at larger enterprise legacy organizations. Hey, David. So today I wanted to talk about culture of experimentation, testing, optimization in larger enterprise environments. And this is something we've done a lot of. Maybe counterintuitively, I think you'd probably agree with this. Enterprises, despite having more budget, more resources, plenty of scale to run experiments, often have a harder time actually going through the process and building that culture of experimentation relative to smaller, more agile companies. So I want to spend some time unpacking that. Why do you think that is?
Definitely true. I think there's a difference between the enterprise companies that have grown from those startups who were very experimentation focused. And it seems like today we're more so talking about these legacy enterprise companies that the testing, the experiments, the data focus is not built into their core methodologies. So how do we change that? Like most big shifts and big projects, if you look at it in its entirety, you might be overwhelmed, which is why we kind of break it down into the bite-sized pieces. But more directly to your question, there's really a few reasons, and in no particular order. Really, a big one is that these large companies are built up of many entities, many departments, many department heads who have spent their careers entrenching themselves, making sure that they're doing what's best for their outcomes and their team outcomes. Getting one of the primary challenges is just getting these various stakeholders, various executives aligned around an approach that is quite often much different than how they have done things in the past. Core issue is the stakeholder buy-in, not just kind of a point of contact, an experimentation head, but getting the buy-in from some of these various other teams and organizations. The other thing, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, but enterprise companies tend to move really slow and very methodical about what they do. And as an example, if we're just talking about website experience, website development, getting new features, new updates rolled out often follow a very conservative and cadenced schedule that doesn't always align with the more scrappy, kind of loose a bit approach that is important with experimentation. Being able to ship and validate features, new ideas, new things without going through this long-standing kind of release cycle, being able to validate certain things. So the other piece there is just the mindset shift from enterprise, everything we ship has to be perfect and sign off on all levels of the organization, to this idea of shipping an MVP update that allows you to validate a hypothesis and following that on with the more official rollout and quality that enterprise would expect. So just to summarize there, one is getting everyone on board with this mindset shift, new way of doing things, getting people aligned that might often not always be looking out for each other's interests within these enterprise entities. Another one is shifting to a more agile approach. And actually, to dig deeper into that, it's not that these leaders don't want to ship fast. It's that they are unable to due to the various levels of internal bureaucracy. So being able to decouple a lot of the experimentation motion, at least initially, completely from other internal processes helps bypass that friction and allow us to kind of get the ball rolling.
I think there's a couple things here. One, you pointed out that you might be a large enterprise, but if experimentation was always part of your DNA, and this is often more true in consumer environments or heavy product focused SaaS companies, where experimentation might have been part of your DNA from when you started. And if that's grown along with the organization, then you are probably in a better place than the B2B legacy, for lack of a better term, company that is now trying to bring and instill a culture of experimentation. That's a much harder thing to do. And to your point, a mindset shift. And we've worked with many of those kind of companies over the years where, we're trying to bring that mentality and that approach to bear and dealing with a lot of organizational change to make that happen. And that's the hard part. And that's the mindset shift that you're talking about. I think there are really two things, as we know, two main factors that make experimentation and optimization work. One is a willingness to tolerate managed risk, right? You're running experiments and you want to be able to take some swings and see what works and see what doesn't. And the second one is velocity and speed and how quickly you can go through your ideas and find the needle in the haystack that is going to work. Tolerance for risk and velocity are two things that are often not present at larger enterprise legacy organizations. And so that's, I think, at the core, the hardest part of it, right? How do you bring managed risk and ability to take swings to bear, and how do you do it quickly? And sort of the ironic thing is, as we've talked about, experimentation is a way to mitigate risk. It's not just about growing, your numbers. It's about how can we try things out in a contained way and validate it before we commit, much more significant organizational resources against it. If you can unlock and solve that problem for the larger enterprise, you're giving them a vehicle to be able to try things out and stay ahead of the competition in a way that doesn't change their entire, forward-looking journey, and lets them test these things out in a constrained way. So that's really where the opportunity is and why we think it's so important.
Just to reiterate, like the mitigate risk, that's a story and a framing that is pretty powerful when you communicate it correctly to some of these folks. They might not get it entirely, but as soon as you're able to clearly explain and really demonstrate that a part of this is risk mitigation, and we're able to save time, save resources following this model, a lot of people can understand that.
I'd also add that this is not just a problem that is about these companies themselves. I think in many cases, the people talking about websites and positioning and messaging often kind of simplify the message and make it unrealistic for larger enterprises. So, for example, I see, a lot of website landing page experts posting on LinkedIn about, here's what your homepage should look like. It should communicate the single value proposition. It should be very clear as opposed to in terms of the next steps for the customer, and it should allow them to sign up. Well, when you're a large enterprise organization with 10 BUs sprawled across 45 different countries, right? Your customer journey is not that simple, right? And your value proposition is not that simple. And you can't just communicate it all in a single homepage, right? It's complicated. And you're dealing with different buyer groups, different personas, different accounts, different industries, you name it, you have it. So the recommendations and the processes and the approaches need to consider that complexity as well. And complexity makes things harder, especially when you're trying to understand, and optimize that customer journey to revenue.
Yeah, and I do want to dig a bit deeper into this issue of oversimplification of the process. You're completely right. With these larger organizations, they have a lot of priorities. They have a lot of internal stakeholders who are all vying for a space on the homepage, for example. So it's not as simple as distilling things down into one clear value proposition. You also need to take into account the internal dynamic. Internally, some of these folks are literally fighting for their lives for a section of the homepage to call out their particular business unit. So I think that is a decent segue into talking about the best approach to get experimentation started within your organization. Now, one thing is universally clear. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a large org or a startup. For initial experiments, initial testing, while you're working on getting further internal buy-in, you already have a champion identified, someone who sees the value of experimentation and wants to get it rolled out. You have the initial champion, but you still, the executives, other units are not, don't really see the vision yet, is to focus on the highest leverage site area as possible that doesn't have a lot of this internal friction. So looking at the homepage, any website homepage, sure, they're going to get a ton of visitors. However, the intent of these visitors is going to be very different. So if you look at actual relative conversion rate, revenue that's coming directly from some of these homepage touches compared to, kind of overall page view visitor denominator is going to be fairly low. So you want to focus deeper in the funnel. And the good thing about that also is deeper in the funnel normally has less stakeholders, less people. For example, on a onboarding flow, usually owned by one team, onboarding team, product team, whoever. On the marketing side, we often recommend starting as deep in the funnel that market owns. And this is for e-commerce website, this would be the cart, the checkout experience. For lead gen, this would be the form experience. Scaling up experimentation is a process and it takes time. And it's more than just going on blogs, viewing random test ideas, seeing what competitors are doing, and applying it to the website. As you mature, as the program grows, you're going to be looking at the data. You're going to be more innovative than that. But in the early stages, there are repeatable patterns, especially as we talk about the form experience. We often lead with and are big proponents of a multi-step form experience. As an example, this has shown to decrease the friction of the flow, increase incremental leads, quality leads quite significantly. Focusing on this high leverage area, the lead form, with a repeatable pattern that has worked well pretty much universally, you're able to work through the early stages of process and building an experiment, and more importantly, getting positive results that you can then share and propagate through the organization to then, down the line as the flywheel gets going and you're launching experiments, expand to different areas of the customer journey when you're armed with this early success. Seen it before where, look, with any new initiative, if early success isn't seen, then you're going up against an uphill battle. The reality is most experiments do fail. The baseline metric is expect a 25% or so win rate on your experiments. So if you launch 3 experiments and they're all your first experiments and they all fail, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just is going to take a lot more effort to communicate how these losing experiments have provided value through insights, et cetera. It's going to be more difficult for an executive to really grasp that value than a monetary revenue ROI. So as you're kickstarting, think about site areas that are high leverage, which means the relative conversion rate over the visitors that make it to that particular part of the website or the journey is really high. Make sure it's really high so that as you launch the experiment, there's a high likelihood that will have a strong monetary or revenue impact. And then from there, you can build and move towards, again, some of these other areas that may not be as clear-cut win or maybe a bit more difficult to get a quote-unquote win.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting at is this idea that nothing can build a self-sustaining experimentation program and culture as well as wins, right? And as well as showing impact and positive impact on revenue aligned KPIs. And the easiest way to do that is to start with an area that is likely to show that impact, but also thread the needle on, the places on the site that aren't going to get all of the attention from all of the stakeholders and all of the BUs. So the homepage is often not the best starting point because so many people are looking at it. And we know from many clients that we've wanted to run experiments on homepages, and then it got nixed by the brand team, or in some cases even the CEO, because it wasn't aligned with, their perspective and their vision. So, you mentioned the form. I think another great starting place is paid landing pages. One of the nice things about larger enterprise organizations is you're typically running lots of paid campaigns, and hopefully they're to dedicated landing pages. And if you can show impact on those, you get the conversion, but also ROAS bump. But the paid media team is going to love you. But in addition to that, they're kind of siloed landing pages that are under the control of, one specific team that you have to work with to get it right. And if you can show wins there, then that becomes your pilot that you can then propagate and socialize within the organization and say, hey, using data, using evidence, and using a hypothesis-based mindset, here's what we were able to do. Where else can we apply that? And that's ultimately what it's really about, right? It's not necessarily just about the win. It's about that mindset and process shift to, bring on a more disciplined, high velocity testing, hypothesis driven, and revenue aligned KPI mindset that you can then scale across the organization.
Viewing these, I guess we can call them like more simple areas of a website experience, like a specific paid landing page. It also allows you to work through some of the other components of building an experimentation program, some of the process and the program management. So as an example, we recently started working with a very large global enterprise, followed a similar approach to what we've described today, focusing on the paid side, the lead form experience side. Ran an experiment and was able to get a sizable increase in pipeline and revenue, which is great. Our stakeholder, kind of the champion, is able to use that to propagate internally, get more buy-in, get more, essentially executive eyes. And also, it allows us to work through how to operationalize some of these winning features and components. One of the main benefits is the decoupled nature. I do want to stress, it is really important. If you're constrained by internal team production releases, production ready code, things of that nature, it's just going to slow down the velocity and slow down the momentum. So being able to build and validate experiments decoupled from that internal process, get the signal, get the impact and the win, and then work towards how to implement this validated update or feature into the actual production code base. By focusing on like a simple one-off paid landing page, can then get in a winning experiment. You can use that as kind of a simple way to codify some of the follow-on process of showing the results, showing the impact, and then getting that experience hard-coded into the actual enterprise web app. Most experiments aren't going to win, but you're going to gain really valuable insights or customer insights that can likely be used across different channels and different teams. So something we learned on the website, probably maybe an angle, how we're framing things, is probably going to be valuable on the paid side as well, or other marketing efforts. So sharing those allows those folks as well to see the value in what we're doing. The most efficient way that I've seen these programs be run is to have the core champion, like the experimentation champion, and that could be a team as well, and they work across functions.